My beloved child, there is a conversation happening behind the scenes that you were never meant to overhear, yet somehow the truth is finding its way toward you. Your soulmate recently met someone close to you, and what makes this moment extraordinary is not simply who they met, but why they chose that person instead of coming directly to you. Stay with me for a moment, because the first thing they talked about may completely change the way you understand their silence. They did not begin by discussing ordinary things. They began by talking about you. Your name entered the conversation quietly, almost cautiously, as though your soulmate had been carrying something in their heart for far longer than you realized. They wanted answers, but they were afraid of asking you directly. They wanted to know whether you still cared, whether you had moved on, whether there was still a place for them in your heart. And the person sitting across from them knew more than your soulmate expected. That person had noticed something about you, something your soulmate desperately wanted to understand. Your soulmate may have appeared calm during that conversation, but underneath that calm was a question they could no longer silence. Do you think they still believe in us? As this unfolds, clarity will come. Because this meeting was not random. It happened at a moment when your soulmate was standing between two choices: continue hiding what they feel, or finally admit that losing the connection with you would hurt more than they ever wanted to confess. But then the conversation took a turn your soulmate did not expect. The person close to you asked them a simple question: if you had one chance to tell them everything, what would you say? And suddenly, the confidence disappeared. Your soulmate became emotional. They started talking about memories they thought they had buried. They mentioned moments with you that seemed insignificant at the time but somehow stayed with them. A look. A sentence. A moment when you were there for them without asking for anything in return. They revealed that certain memories still return when they are alone. They admitted that they have tried to convince themselves that they could simply move forward, but something always pulls their thoughts back toward you. Then came the revelation that may surprise you most: they were not asking this person how to forget you. They were asking how to approach you without making the same mistake again. Think about that for a moment. The conversation was never really about whether they cared. It was about whether they still had a chance. They wanted to know whether you would listen if they finally spoke honestly. They wanted to know if your heart had already closed its door. And the person close to you apparently gave them an answer that your soulmate had been desperately hoping to hear. Something huge is waiting for you, because the next part of this conversation revealed what your soulmate has been hiding behind their distance. Your soulmate then admitted something they may never have had the courage to say directly to you: I don't know how to tell them what happened inside me. They explained that their silence was not always because they stopped caring. Sometimes they became silent because their feelings became too complicated to explain. They feared saying the wrong thing. They feared being rejected. They feared discovering that you no longer felt anything for them. And there was another reason they had been holding back: they did not want you to see how deeply your absence affected them. The person close to you apparently listened without interrupting, and then said something that forced your soulmate to confront the truth: if you keep waiting for the perfect moment, you may lose the moment completely. Those words stayed with them. Your soulmate realized that time does not erase every connection. Sometimes it only reveals which connections were real enough to survive it. This may resonate as we continue, because perhaps you have been wondering why everything suddenly feels different. Perhaps you have sensed that something is shifting even though you cannot explain it. That feeling may come from the fact that your soulmate has finally begun facing the emotions they avoided. And now, there is one final detail about that secret meeting that changes everything. Before they left, your soulmate asked the person close to you one last question. Do you think they would still recognize the person I am now? The answer was not what they expected. And that answer may be the reason their next move toward you is going to be completely different from anything you have seen before. Because the truth is, your soulmate did not leave that conversation with certainty, they left with courage. They may still have questions, but one thing became clear: they can no longer pretend that you mean nothing to them. The person close to you became an unexpected bridge between what your soulmate feels and what they have been too afraid to say. And somewhere in that conversation, your soulmate understood that if they want a genuine connection with you, they cannot keep hiding behind silence, distance, or pride. They have to become honest. So if you have been waiting for a sign, do not assume that silence means nothing is happening. Sometimes the biggest changes begin in conversations you never hear. Sometimes a person talks about you to someone else because they are still gathering the courage to talk to you. And the most surprising part is this: your soulmate may have learned something about your heart that they never knew before. Something that made them realize they may not be too late. Stay with me for a moment and remember this: the secret meeting was not the ending of your story. It may have been the moment your soulmate finally understood what they could lose. The conversation started with questions about you, moved through memories of you, and ended with a decision about you. And whatever happens next, the hidden truth is finally becoming impossible for them to ignore. My beloved child, what happened after that secret conversation is where the story becomes even more powerful, because your soulmate did not simply walk away and forget what they heard. They carried those words with them. On the way home, they replayed the entire conversation in their mind, especially one sentence that struck a place inside them they had been trying to protect for a long time. Stay with me for a moment, because this is where the hidden meaning begins to surface. The person close to you apparently told your soulmate something they had never considered before. You may be waiting for them to make the first move because you are afraid of what you will hear. But have you ever considered that they might be waiting for exactly the same reason? That question changed the atmosphere completely. Your soulmate suddenly realized that the silence between you may not have been caused by a lack of feeling. It may have been created by two people protecting their hearts at the same time. And then they started remembering the moments when you tried to reach them in subtle ways. They remembered your patience. They remembered your kindness. They remembered the times you could have walked away but somehow remained emotionally present. Your soulmate began wondering whether they had misunderstood your silence. Maybe they had mistaken your strength for indifference. Maybe they thought you were moving forward when, inside, you were simply waiting for clarity. This realization created something inside them that they could no longer ignore. They started asking themselves a question that had no easy answer: what if I have been waiting for a sign that was already there? As this unfolds, clarity will come, because the meeting with that person close to you gave your soulmate something they had been missing for a long time. Another perspective on your connection. And then came the part that your soulmate almost refused to talk about. They admitted that there was one particular memory of you they still could not let go of. It was not necessarily the biggest moment between you. In fact, it may have been something incredibly simple. A conversation. A quiet moment. The way you looked at them when they were struggling. The way you made them feel understood without demanding an explanation. That memory had stayed hidden in their heart, and during the conversation, they finally admitted how much it still affected them. The person close to you asked, "If that memory still matters after all this time, what are you really waiting for?" Your soulmate had no immediate answer. And that silence said more than words could. They were beginning to understand that the real obstacle was not distance. It was fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of hearing no. Fear of discovering that you had changed. But most importantly, fear of admitting how much they still cared. This may resonate as we continue, because sometimes people do not disappear because they have stopped feeling. Sometimes they step back because their feelings became too difficult to control. Your soulmate may have been trying to appear unaffected while privately questioning everything. And now, after speaking to someone close to you, they finally saw the situation differently. Before leaving, they asked for one more thing. They wanted to know whether you had ever mentioned them recently. They wanted to know whether their name still carried any emotion when it came from your lips. That question alone revealed something your soulmate had been hiding. They were not looking for information about your life, they were looking for evidence that they still had a place in your heart. If this story is resonating with you, stay with me, because the next realization is even deeper. Your soulmate apparently began thinking about what they would say if they suddenly found themselves standing in front of you. At first, they imagined a simple conversation. But the more they thought about it, the more they realized they could not pretend everything was normal. They wanted to explain why they pulled away. They wanted to tell you about the emotions they never expressed. They wanted to acknowledge the things they may have handled poorly. And they wanted you to know that their silence did not erase what they felt. The person close to you apparently encouraged them to stop trying to create the perfect speech and simply be honest. That advice stayed with them. Share this message with someone who needs a reminder that silence does not always mean the story is over, and if this kind of emotional storytelling speaks to you, subscribe so you can stay with us for what comes next. Because the most important part of the conversation was not what your soulmate said about the past. It was what they started planning for the future. They began considering whether they should finally reach out, whether they should send a message, whether they should create an opportunity to see you again. Something had shifted. They were no longer asking, "Should I forget them?" They were asking, "How do I make things right?" That is a completely different question. And it tells you something important about what may have been happening beneath the surface. The person close to you may have unknowingly become the voice that pushed your soulmate toward honesty. Your soulmate left that meeting carrying a new understanding. If they truly wanted another chance, they could not keep hiding behind uncertainty forever. But there was one final thought that followed them after the conversation ended. They wondered whether you would recognize the person they have become. Because time changes people. Experiences change people. Silence changes people. Your soulmate knows they are not exactly the same person you once knew, and that realization made them emotional. They began wondering whether you would notice the growth, the lessons, and the changes that happened while you were apart. And somewhere in that quiet moment, they reached a conclusion that may explain why their energy now feels different. They no longer want to be remembered only for the mistakes they made. They want the chance to show you who they are now. Something huge is waiting for you, but it may not arrive in the dramatic way you imagine. Sometimes the biggest turning point begins with one honest conversation, one unexpected realization, and one person finally deciding that hiding is no longer easier than speaking. Your soulmate met someone close to you because they needed answers. But they walked away with something far more powerful: courage. And now the question is no longer whether they still think about you. The question is whether they are finally ready to let you know. My beloved child, there is one detail about that meeting that your soulmate never expected to reveal, and it may explain why their behavior has felt so different lately. After leaving the conversation, they kept thinking about one question: what if they already know? Not know about the meeting, but know about the feelings they have been hiding. Because the person close to you had noticed something your soulmate could no longer hide. Every time your name came up, their expression changed. Their voice became softer. Their confidence disappeared. They tried to change the subject, but the person sitting across from them noticed immediately. Stay with me for a moment, because this is where the conversation becomes deeply personal. Your soulmate finally admitted that they had been checking for signs that you still cared, even while pretending they did not need any reassurance. They remembered small details about you that they should have forgotten by now. They remembered things you said casually, moments you probably never realized were important, and even the feeling of being understood by you. Then the person close to you asked something unexpected: if you still remember all of that, why are you acting like you don't? Your soulmate became quiet. That silence revealed more than any explanation could. They knew they had been protecting themselves behind distance. They knew they had allowed pride and uncertainty to create a wall between you. And suddenly, they understood that the person they were afraid to approach was the very person they secretly wished would approach them first. What happened next was even more revealing. Your soulmate began describing the moment they realized that their feelings had not disappeared. It happened unexpectedly, during an ordinary moment when something reminded them of you. They said they tried to ignore it, but the memory stayed. They went on with their day, but your presence remained somewhere in their thoughts. And eventually, they had to admit something they had been avoiding: moving forward had not meant moving on. The person close to you listened carefully and then asked, "So what do you actually want?" Your soulmate did not answer immediately. They looked away, thought for a moment, and finally admitted that what they wanted was not another confusing situation. They wanted honesty. They wanted peace. They wanted an opportunity to speak without pretending. And most importantly, they wanted to know whether you would still be willing to hear them. As this unfolds, clarity will come, because this is the hidden connection between the secret meeting and what may happen next. Your soulmate was not collecting information to manipulate the situation. They were trying to understand whether there was still a door open between you. They were afraid that approaching you without knowing how you felt could make everything more complicated. So they chose someone close to you because they believed that person might understand your heart better than anyone else. But what they learned was something they never expected: you may have been waiting for honesty too. Then the conversation reached the part your soulmate had been avoiding from the beginning. They admitted that there was something they wished they could take back. Not a specific sentence, but the way they handled the connection when emotions became difficult. They realized that there were moments when you deserved an explanation and they gave you silence instead. There were moments when you deserved reassurance and they gave you distance. They now understand that silence can create stories of its own, and perhaps you created your own explanation for why they stepped away. Your soulmate knows that if they ever return to your life, they cannot simply act as though nothing happened. They would have to acknowledge what happened between you. They would have to listen to your side too. And that realization changed their entire attitude. The person close to you apparently told them, if you really care about them, don't return with promises. Return with honesty. Those words stayed with your soulmate. They began imagining what it would feel like to finally sit with you and speak without hiding behind excuses. This may resonate as we continue, because perhaps you have been wondering why someone who once seemed distant suddenly feels emotionally closer again. Sometimes a person needs to lose the comfort of silence before they understand the value of an honest conversation. Your soulmate may now be reaching that point. And here is the revelation that makes everything connected. Before the meeting ended, your soulmate apparently asked one final question about you. They asked, "Do you think they would forgive me?" Notice the question. They did not ask whether you still cared. They did not ask whether you had forgotten them. They asked whether forgiveness was possible. That means somewhere inside them, they already understand that something between you needs healing before anything meaningful can happen again. The person close to you did not promise them anything. Instead, they reminded your soulmate that forgiveness cannot be demanded. It has to be earned through honesty and consistent actions. Your soulmate nodded, and for the first time, they seemed less interested in controlling the outcome and more interested in becoming worthy of the conversation they wanted to have with you. Something huge is waiting for you, but remember, the power of this story is not that someone secretly met someone close to you. The power is what that meeting forced your soulmate to confront. They were forced to look at their own heart without distractions. They were forced to admit that you still matter. And they were forced to consider that if they truly want another chapter with you, they cannot keep hiding behind silence. The secret conversation may be over, but the conversation they truly want, the one with you, may only be beginning.